There is a really famous story in Japan which is related to Zen Buddhism, and it is about the apprenticeship of a fencing student when he comes to the master's abode to learn Japanese fencing. And it's a wonderful story, and it articulates what is needed for us to act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation from our true nature. And so as the story goes, the aspiring fencing student goes to the master's abode and says to the master, I want to learn fencing. And the master goes, yeah, that's all well and good, but first I want you to do the dishes. And so the student thought, well, this is very strange. But if you understand particularly Zen Buddhist koans and stories in Japan, there's a lot to do with doing the dishes, as if it's like some sort of laborious chore that most of us try to avoid at the best of times. Anyway, as the story goes, the student begins to do the dishes, right? So they're doing the dishes, and then the master comes along and cracks him on the head with the fencing stick. And then the student is like, what the? Like, surprised. So then the next day, the student is mustering up a defense. They think, okay, I'm going to try and defend when I sense the master here. And then the master comes along and cracks him in the back. And he's like, oh, damn it. So then the next day, he's trying to defend possibly both places, the back and his head. And then the master comes along and sticks it right up his butt. And so the student is taken back by this. He can't believe the treatment that he's getting. And so this goes on for weeks and then months in the story. And the student is constantly always trying to muster up a defense. He's overthinking the situation. He's not acting immediately and appropriately to each and every situation. And so then the master finally comes back, but this time the student is completely calm. And he's concentrating on just doing the dishes and not worried about anything else. And then the master comes along to crack him right across the nose, and then the student catches the fencing stick. And so the moral of this story is that when we're overthinking something, we can't act naturally, right? We have a mind of deliberation. In Zen Buddhism, it is important to have a mind of no deliberation. Actually, within Taoism as well, it's important to have a mind of no deliberation, because you cannot act immediately and appropriately to the changing panorama of life, and life is constantly changing. And so when we're overthinking, we constantly are thinking about something that is actually not really going to happen, and then when something else happens, we are surprised and taken back by that. And so in cognitive science, they've actually studied this extensively. And so when we unpack cognitive science, we see that we have the cold cognition in the frontal lobe here, which is where we do all of the analytical thinking. And then in these unconscious regions of the brain, which is a larger portion of the brain, are more of the holistic and natural cognition that we have. Our nature actually exists in that place, our true nature, because the cold cognition within humans developed as we evolved to ensure our survival. But the problem is, as we've developed, we don't have a lion coming down to eat us no more. More of our survival is to do with a psychological level. So in some sense, this can be unnecessary most of the time, being over analytical, even though it has a place with us for sure. But we over-employ it, see? So in the Japanese Zen story, the student was over-employing his cold cognition, and he couldn't act naturally to the situation. He had a mind of deliberation, which put him out of sync with reality itself. And so within Zen and Taoism, the idea is to downregulate this part of the brain, this part of the mind, the analytical part, so then we can act effortlessly and be in the flow of life, which is what wu-wei is in Chinese, and not to be caught here or there by the changing panorama of life. So then you are perfectly calibrated to the environment. You are in harmony with the environment. You are at one with the Tao. This is the point, right? Once you downregulate that, you are one with the Tao. You are moving with the river. You are not fighting the river no more or holding onto the banks. You are moving as one with the Tao, and the river's power becomes your power, which is de in Chinese, virtue, or the virtue of the non-virtuous. So a virtue you attain when you're not actually trying to attain virtue, which is paradoxical, right? Because it's natural to us. This is what naturalness is. Zitran in Chinese. It's our nature. It is our nature to act with a mind of no deliberation. But the way that the world trains us is to have a mind of deliberation, to overly think about things, which disconnects us from the Tao, which does not make us Zen in any way. It makes us like a rational computer that overly thinks about every little detail, which then causes conflict and disagreement, not only with the world, but also within ourselves. We see this in the world today, right? More so than ever, where people are in disagreement and conflict over the most frivolous things. And so what this does, this type of training that we find in the Japanese Zen story, the fencing story, is that once we begin to relax this part of the mind, we down-regulate it, as we find in the Zhuangzi text with a lot of the stories, the Buchading story and so forth and so on, is that we allow then our nature to calibrate to the world as it is. And that's what's important, calibrating to the world as it is, harmonizing with the world. So then you can move as a limb of the world, connected to it, which then you can avoid harm and avoid incurring harm on others. This is the importance and the depth of such stories in the Zen tradition. And this is what is important in our spiritual practice, ultimately, is to reach that mind of no deliberation. Shanti, shanti, shanti.